Remember that time that giant rats almost ate everyone's favorite fire-breathing flying turtle? You don't? Giant monster movies were big in 1960s Japan. But all four of the five major studios looked around and said, hey, Toho's got a monopoly over this shit. They didn't like that. In comes Daiei, a once proud company who brought out the likes of Akira Kurosawa and even Ishiro Honda. But by now, that company was on the verge of utter collapse due to their president being mentally retarded, to say the least. Needless to say, Daiei's board of directors made some terrible, terrible decisions. My favorite one being the introduction of 70mm film to Japan. They shot several films in this format, only to realize that hardly any theaters in Japan were equipped with projectors to handle 70mm film. Needless to say, those movies bombed. The most famous of these movies being Gautama the Buddha, Japan's answer to the very successful Ten Commandments. It was actually kind of similar to what 20th Century Fox was going through over in the United States. So they looked at the giant monster movies Toho was pumping out like handjobs given by a whore, and said they wanted something similar. But not all that similar. It becomes clear to Daiei that they wanted a giant monster flick they could call their own, while still maintaining a sense of highbrow to it. They even brought on veteran director Mitsuo Maruyama to direct the project. And their idea was Nezura the Rat Monster. This movie was to be something straight out of H.G. Wells and Bird-Eye Gordon. Rats eating a mysterious food which makes them grow gigantic. They swim to Tokyo and wreak havoc, eating helpless people until starving themselves to the point of cannibalism. When I actually read the basic plot online, I'll be honest, that actually sounded pretty cool, like the Killer Shrews, but better. I could see it being a clever commentary on food shortages and population explosion, 1965 being the tail end of Japan's post-war population boom. But that's for another video. I'm here to stupefy you about the insanity that was the making of this film. Daiei was to make Nezura come to life with a mixture of effects techniques. Men in suits, puppets, and yes, real rats running down miniature roads and streets while shot at a high frame rate. It was to be a tremendous undertaking, the first kaiju flick really made on this scale by a company other than Toho. They were going strong, making promotional art that can still be found, building miniatures, even the props and suits of the rats, until they were about ready to shoot. As to be expected, the rat wranglers had purchased domesticated rats to be their monsters. That makes sense. I mean, they're easy to control, they are pretty friendly around people, they're pretty clean, and yeah, they are kind of cute. Well, someone at Daiei had different ideas. Someone wanted real-life sewer rats from Tokyo. Oh, that sounds great. Who, in their right mind, would actually be okay with that stupid idea? I mean, rats are nasty, they're covered in fleas, and they bite people, they eat babies, for Christ's sake. The Daiei boards of directors approved it. So, out goes the rat wranglers, capturing sewer rats by the hundreds. They began shooting with them on their miniature sets and discovered quickly this was a horrible, horrible idea. First, they didn't like doing what they were told. I mean, domesticated rats would have been bad enough, but at least they could be somewhat controlled. Then came the mating, and soon little babies were everywhere. Then came those who escaped, wreaking havoc not only at the studio, but also the neighboring communities and businesses. Then came the people being bitten horribly by these pests, and then came the fleas and the ticks. Oh boy. Here's the fun part. The neighbors of Daiei stormed the company demanding something be done, because those wild rats were eating their crops, eating their houses, biting their children, and breeding. Did I mention breeding? So Daiei calls in pest control, only to discover that the stage with the miniature effects were infested with ticks and fleas to the point that it needed to be burned. So Daiei does the best thing possible by just letting the studio sit there. And the ticks and fleas spread, and the rats which remained began to starve, and most ate themselves. It's actually kind of like the movie, now that I think of it. So finally, in comes the flamethrowers, and bye-bye the entire studio building. Gone, up in smokes, all because of a giant rat movie. And needless to say, Nezura was shit-canned, kaput, pushing up daisies, shitting the bed, shit-canned, and never made. But if there's anything good to come from this story, it is that we got Gamera out of this mess. Daiei still needed money after all, especially now that they burned a giant hole in their studio. In comes Noriaki Yuasa to save the day, and history was made. And that was the time giant rats almost ate the giant fire-breathing flying turtle.